This video will show you how to fill out your quad chart. You want to make sure you get this all the way filled out and you understand everything I'm talking about before you come to class, so that when we start working these examples that you know how to use this tool to the best of your ability. You might want to get 7 different colored either thin tip markers, map colors, or pens. Like thick tip markers are not going to work because you're going to be writing really tiny. You don't have to have different colored markers, or if you just have 3 or 4, you can do that, but there are 7 sections, so 7 would be the best. So pause this and go get you some markers. Okay, you're going to take that big piece of paper that I gave you in class the other day, and you're going to fold it in half hot dog style, so lengthwise, and then in half hot dog again. So when you're finished with that, you should have 4 long skinny sections from when you folded it in half, then when you folded those halves in half again. Okay, so we're going to first label our headings for our quad chart. That way when I refer to each section, you know where to go. So on the top, you're going to put quadrilaterals, because this is going to encompass everything, all the quadrilaterals. Then as you go down the left side, we're going to have parallelograms. That's going to take up your sections, your entire left side of your chart. In the third column will be trapezoid, and in the last column will be kite. Then about halfway down your chart, again in the first column you're going to have rectangles. That's only going to be one section. Right next to that you're going to have rhombus. And then right next to that in the third section you're going to have mid-segment of a trapezoid, and that should be right below original trapezoid. Okay? Then at the very bottom you're going to have a square, and that is also going to take up 2 sections down there. Okay, so get your headings labeled, therefore when I refer back to each section you'll know where to write that information in. Okay, so we're going to start at the top with a quadrilateral as our general topic. The definition is always going to go right below the section heading. So in this case, the definition of a quadrilateral is a 4-sided polygon. And as we move through the chart, we'll just talk about different specific types of quadrilaterals. A parallelogram is our first kind, so you're going to put all of this information in that first heading section where we talked about writing parallelogram. So right underneath the name, you're always going to put the definition. So the definition of a parallelogram is a quadrilateral with 2 pairs of parallel sides. So it's going to be the opposite sides that are going to be parallel. So we drew a little picture of a parallelogram here, and we labeled it A, B, C, D. Remember, the only rule when naming a figure is that you have to go around in order. You can't jump around. So A, B, C, D. This is the little symbol for parallelogram, so that's what his name is. Parallelogram A, B, C, D. A parallelogram has 5 properties. One of them is that the opposite sides are parallel, and we get that from the definition. So we're also going to add markings to our drawing as we go through the properties. So this side over here is parallel to his opposite side, as well as this side is parallel to his opposite side. That's the first good indication that you have a parallelogram. In addition to the opposite sides being parallel, they're also going to be congruent, so we can mark that as well. AB is congruent to CD, and BC is congruent to AD. Okay. Also, opposite angles are going to be congruent, so angle A is going to be congruent to angle C, and angle B is going to be congruent to angle D. Consecutive angles are supplementary. Now we're not going to mark that on our picture, but what that means, consecutive means next to, and supplementary means they add to 180. So A and B will add up to 180, B and C will add up to 180, C and D and A. If the angles are next to each other, they will be adding to 180. The last part we're also not going to draw on our picture. The diagonals bisect each other. Now you know a diagonal means from corner to corner. So the 2 diagonals here will be AC and BD. Bisect means cut in half. So they're going to meet at this midpoint, and from A to the midpoint will be congruent to C to the midpoint. B to the midpoint will be congruent to the midpoint to D. So they will cut each other in half. Now pause right here and fill out the rest of this if I talk too fast for you to write. Next, on your space down under rectangle, the definition of a rectangle is a quadrilateral with 4 right angles. Okay, still we drew a rectangle here. We're still going to call them A, B, C, D. There is no symbol for rectangle. Only a parallelogram has a symbol. So you're going to have to write rectangle A, B, C, D. Properties are a rectangle. They also have all the properties of a parallelogram. So we're not going to draw those in, but the ones we just talked about, opposite sides are parallel, opposite sides are congruent. All 5 of those that we just talked about for parallelograms also apply to rectangles. Okay. In addition to those properties, we have 2 more. All the angles are right angles. So we're going to draw that in. Okay. And in this time, the diagonals, in addition to bisecting each other, they're also going to be congruent. So however long it is from A to C will also be that long from B to D. Okay, pause right here and fill in the rest of rectangles if you're not ready to move on yet. Right next to rectangles, we have a rhombus. A rhombus is a quadrilateral with 4 sides, 4 congruent sides, excuse me. So we can label that A, B, AC, CD, and BD are all congruent to one another. Okay, just like with rectangle, there's no shortcut symbol. You're just going to call this rhombus ABCD. And I just noticed that I did not label mine properly, so I'm going to fix that. This should be C, and this should be D, because again, we have to go around in order. That's my fault. Okay. Now, a rhombus has all the properties of a parallelogram, just like a rectangle did. In addition to those 5 properties, he also has that all the sides are congruent. We got that from the definition, so we already knew that. His diagonals, in addition to bisecting each other, they are perpendicular. And we talked about that perpendicular means they meet at a 90-degree angle. Okay? And their diagonals also bisect opposite angles. So in this case, since we don't have too much to write in, I'm going to go ahead and let you draw in the diagonals. I'm going to draw them in with dotted lines here and here. And we're going to label those as perpendicular. And when I say they bisect the opposite angles, that means this piece of A and this piece are going to be congruent. And this piece is congruent to this piece over here. Okay, and vice versa for BD. This piece is congruent to this piece, and this piece is congruent to this piece. Okay, feel free to label that on your quad chart as well. Okay, pause here if you're not through with rhombus. We're going to move on down to square. Now, a square gets to take up both sections on the left side, so don't feel like you have to squeeze this into one tiny section. A quadrilateral with 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. So basically, a square is a rhombus and a rectangle all put together. And so that happens, you see that with its properties as well. It's still holding all the properties of a parallelogram, plus all the properties we talked about for a rectangle, plus the new properties we added on for a rhombus. So he has all the properties that we just talked about. Diagonals bisecting opposite angles, right angles, congruent sides. It has everything we've already talked about. Okay? Pause right here if you're not done with square.